So Barrett, welcome to the original digital interview series. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I'm doing good. So for people who don't know who you are, Barrett, let's let you do a little bit of an introduction. Who are you? What do you do?
My name is Barrett Young. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for a company called Netradyne that focuses in advanced artificial intelligence applications for commercial vehicles to improve safety on the road.
All right. And how long have you been with those folks?
Just over 3 years now.
Okay. And you've been in that space for a while too.
I've been in this space for about 7 years, but in B2B tech my entire career.
Okay. And then overall, do you think that that space, does that fall into the sort of Internet of Things? What does that fall into in the tech perspective?
It really does. There's an evolution that's happening within commercial vehicles right now where, as you can imagine, most of them have operated in a very antiquated manner for decades. And so there's this revolution happening where new technology is being added to lots of different facets of the vehicle themselves. And many of them fall into that IoT platform where you've got all these different sensors, cameras, and tools that are used to improve performance across the board.
So tell me, like, what's the approach that you take, and how do you try to bring Netradyne to a different point of view in the market?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge always to avoid a sea of sameness, and specifically even in the industry and the company that I'm at now, it's very easy for everyone in the industry to fall into that bucket. And my personality alone is I hate doing what everyone else is doing. It just drives me nuts. So I'm constantly looking for other ways to stand out and to differentiate. And I think one of the big things that I do is we have a quarterly session with my team, and I call it the dinosaur on the moon session. And what we do is I say, listen, if we had to put a dinosaur on the moon, how would you do that? And the goal here is not actually to figure out how to put a dinosaur on the moon, but to force them to think out so far outside of the box it is borderline not feasible or practical. But as you go and you create these ideas that are so far-fetched, you begin to peel them back slightly. And before you know it, you're actually arriving at a solution that is practical,
Mhm.
but most likely something that no one else has done before. And that really encourages everyone to start thinking creatively, finding new ways to approach the same problem, or more importantly, maybe more exciting, is to create ways to differentiate the company or the messaging that's never even been evaluated before.
Mm. And is this a tactic that you just kind of developed on your own? Did you learn it from somebody else? Where'd you get it?
So it's kind of a mixture of multiple different tactics that I've gathered from people. Previous bosses were very inspirational, and they really challenged the status quo and kind of forced the rest of us to do it as well. Even in the conversations that I've had with you have been really inspiring about finding areas that are being underserved within the industry and figuring out how to position the company to address those that ultimately may be, the big golden buckets that people aren't even realizing. So really kind of pulling multiple areas of just experience and realizing that as marketers, at our core, we're creatives.
Mhm.
And as over time, we've become analytical creatives because data will always win. But we need to be the ones that are constantly challenging the status quo and finding new ways of doing things. So it's in our blood.
Yeah, that's true. Because the thing I like about being a marketer so much is that creative component. You get to tap into a part of your brain that you don't always get to exercise. Now, I fancy myself to be kind of a creative person, but also very analytical. And my creativity is very almost myopic. Like I can't really draw that well. I play a little bit of guitar, but I don't play it that well. I have a good ear for music, and I always wish I could have turned that into a job, and I tried a couple times, but this is my outlet for creativity, which is trying to think of ways to think of an answer or a solution to a problem that somebody else hasn't come up with. And I like the dinosaur on the moon concept. I remember I went through a training once on brainstorming, and they said the easiest way to do a brainstorm is look at the accepted industry norms for whatever solution to the problem you're looking at. For example, if you are um, trying to get people to do a test drive for a car, what are the accepted norms? Well, you need a car,
Mhm.
you need keys, you need to be in person, like etc. You need gas. And then basically try to think about what's the exact opposite of that. So at the time we were like, let's do
Exactly.
test drives without a car, without keys, without a person. Like that forces you into a new box.
It does. And that's really the fascinating part about this that really gets me excited. And I think it's the team excited when we go through these exercises is that we have sort of these unconscious bias where we say, all right, we want to go build a new campaign, but instinctively we know, well, we can't do that idea because we have budget constraints, or we can't do that idea because we have resource constraints. And if we can very quickly remove any of those bias or constraints, then we can begin creating these amazing ideas that we never even thought of before, because we're not saying, oh, well, that'd be nice, but we don't have the budget to do that. And that's not the point. The point is to solve the problem. And you're absolutely right. Like, how do we then create a new way for doing things that no one's ever done that before? And I think you're test driving a car without a car or being in person is a great example. And that's how innovation actually really thrives. Not to tout Elon Musk too much, but if you were to say, like, if money wasn't an issue and there was no constraints on brain power to create something, like, what could we actually do? And I think he's done a decent job of kind of solving the world's problems in that way. Is like, we don't have any restrictions, let's just go do it. We'll figure it out as we do it.
Yeah, the creative minds, the creative thinkers are the people who are either the most tortured mentally or the people who are more likely to ignore the obvious and go for something completely different. Do you look for that creative flair, or is it something that you hope to be able to inspire and bring out in these people after you start working for you?
It's a little bit of both, and it also kind of depends on which role that we're hiring for. But there are absolutely questions that I go through in the interviewing process, which I don't go through exactly like the dinosaur on the moon, but I ask them certain questions like, tell me something that you're most proud of. Tell me about a campaign or a project that you did, that you helped lead or influence, you're most proud of. And you can see in the tonation of their voice, the excitement or whatever like that, where they truly begin to get inspired. And when you can catch those little moments of inspiration, you know that there's a lot of promise when you can begin to open up the floodgates of their creativity to finding other areas and ideas.
Do you think that you do a good enough job on a daily basis of giving people the room to play with that creative spark?
I like to think so. In fact, I would hope if you even talk to my team that they would say that one of the best qualities as me as a leader and a manager is I'm subservient in a way that my job is to make them the best at their job. Right. I'm never going to pretend to be better at them in certain areas. So I want to remove the roadblocks. I want to provide them all the resources and whatever they need so that they can go sprint and run. And by doing so, I remove hopefully the boundaries of their creative thinking so that they can do what they do best. And then I'll be the one to come back and say, right, this is fantastic. Let's cut this and add that to make it realistic.
Who do you look at if you want to figure out ways to approach something from an original perspective or to come up with a way to think differently? Who do you look at?
This is going to sound super cliche, so I apologize in advance.
Right.
But I look back at some of my favorite campaigns and the people that created those campaigns. And honestly, one of my favorite ones I even start with is like Steve Jobs' Think Different campaign that he ran with Apple.
We all love that one.
Everyone loves it, and I know it's typical, but what it does is that campaign alone, in the spirit of its even messaging, is it makes you think different. Like, why do you have to conform? Why do you have to not fall within the status quo? And that's a good starting point to go back and say, all right, how do I think different? How do I approach this and be differentiated? And then even Steven Sinek, all of the Start with the Why, all of his videos and speeches and TED Talks are always really inspirational. So and then even past previous bosses in conversations with you, it all kind of comes down to a combination of making sure that I'm not stuck inside my own confines.
Yeah. The Apple campaign is an interesting one because everybody does love it. It is one of my favorite campaigns of all time too. But what I like about it the most is it always reminds me of the people who thought differently about what they were trying to do. And those are people who I tend to forget to look at analytically. And so what that inspired me to do is, I think I've mentioned this to you before, but I'm not positive. Like, I don't read business books. Business books to me are boring. If I'm gonna need a business book, I'll go to Blinkist and I'll listen to it for 25 minutes and get the entire, the entire panacea of what's been discussed in there, because that's all it is. It's rehashing the same topic over and over. I read books about creative people or people who've influenced the world. So I read rock and roll biographies. I read biographies about studio moguls from Hollywood. I read biographies about past presidents who I think are interesting. Those people are forced to think differently, and sometimes they adapt well, sometimes they don't. And it's nice to read about their ups and their downs. There's a guy.
One of my favorite books that would fall into that category is like Shoe Dog, the creation of Nike, and Phil Knight.
Oh yeah.
Now it's not a traditional business book in that, but it shows the journey that Phil and Nike had to go through, and all the problem solving and quite literally the trials and tribulations that it had to go through, being literally the underdog behind Adidas and Reebok and some of these other massive brands at the time. And of course, then the Jordan deal being one that really took them off. But I agree with you. If I ever read a business book, it's usually at nighttime to help myself fall asleep.
What advice would you tell the next two people that you hire?
Never let the confines of traditional business be a restraint for coming up with new ideas to grow a business. I think, and what I mean by that is, we're conditioned through, first starting high school and college in our education, especially in college. And then if you go post-grad, MBA, or anything like that, and then even in the first handful of careers that you get into, we are conditioned to follow a set of rules. And those rules, as marketers, become limiting in our creativity. Oftentimes it's, we've got budget, we've got sales targets to hit, and, all the different sort of cross-functional elements that comes to working within a business. But going back to the point that you just made, some of the most creative, inspirational people in the world are people that aren't even in business, but yet as marketers, we limit our creativity due to some of that. So I think the biggest thing is, like, there's no such thing as thinking outside the box. Think outside of everything you've ever learned. I think that would be probably one of the biggest ones. And second is to, and this is kind of going back to what I mentioned before, never view a leader, a true leader, not just a manager, but a true leader, as someone that you have to report to. Use them as a resource to go do what you do best. Because by doing so, then you're succeeding at what the leader wants you to do, but also you're contributing to the growth of the business that is really unparalleled to where any other effort goes.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. There's two things that come to mind on that. I saw a bumper sticker the other day for a camp that my kids went to, and it just said, "Think outside, no box required," which was really just about getting you to go outdoors, which I thought was kind of cool. And then the other thing, which unfortunately drives my wife batty, is that I basically taught my two boys who are 14 and 11 that rules are to be respected, but they're mostly guideposts for what you're supposed to do. Now, when it comes to school, I tell them you've got to abide by those rules by like 95%. When it comes to the older ones that people impose on you, 20, 30% is totally acceptable. She doesn't like it because she's a rule follower, whereas I don't believe in all the rules necessarily applying all the time.
Yeah, a lot of times those rules were created a long time ago, may not be applicable today. And more importantly, if as a teenager you can find a good reason why the rule should be changed to a different version of it and can make a good use case,
yeah,
so be it.
Yeah, and that's how you think differently.
Exactly.
Well, thanks, Barrett. I appreciate you taking some time, and this will be going up pretty soon.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, see ya.